Hi, so today I would be discussing about RC section, but particularly the reading comprehension section for VRC, and I would be discussing the general pattern of questions, how to attempt them, how to prepare for the section at large, how to practice and read things to prepare for the section, and essentially the strategy for the RC section that we will be discussing today. So let's just start with the fundamental understanding of VRC section for CAT. The out of generally there are 34 questions from VRC section, right? There are generally 34 questions in the VRC section, and out of that, generally 25 questions are generally from 24 questions are generally from RC section itself. So RC, as it is out of a CAT paper, almost 25% of the paper comprises of RC questions. So it's a really important part, and it's somewhat relatively we can prepare a lot for the RC section. As we would see that the RC section or the VRC section at large for CAT do not generally need a lot of vocabulary preparation as like other aptitude exams of this sort. What VRC section requires you to do is that you have to comprehend the argument being made within the passage. You have to understand how, what argument, what point does the author try to get through, and based on that you can answer almost any question, even if you do not particularly understand the specific wordings. Specific, if you do not understand 4 or 5 or 6 words out of the passage, that does not become an issue in solving VRC section for CAT. So let's go through that. So this is the general breakup of VRC section. There's no need to go through that at large because we will be dealing with RC particularly in this session. Additionally, I would be talking about VA in a session tomorrow. If you want to understand how to approach VA questions, you can attend that. So the RC questions can generally be classified in two broad categories. One of them being overall or broad, and the other one is being specific. So as I was saying, in general, the RC questions are dependent on the logic that is being or the argument that is being presented within the passage, and the questions that derive from them are based on the arguments. So some of they can be categorized in two general categories. The overall broad one implies that you have to take a general argument and get information from that. The specific ones are somewhat localized from within a passage. These questions are generally categorized in specific ones. However, most of the questions you would be encountering in a RC would be of overall or broad category. Even if you say see a very specific sentence given and you are to like analyze its context or answer questions based on that, you'd see that it might be contextualized to some other area, some other passage, some other paragraph within the passage. So that is the general thing you have to keep in mind while answering VRC questions for CAT, that even when you see the questions might seem to be localized, it might not be the case. So it come to some examples to reinforce that too for that purpose. So yeah, this is the general some like solving strategy for VRC section. You have to find the overall argument, the broader point that is being made through the passage. Then you structure not just passage wise arguments. There can be like passages can be in multiple orders. However, there is an argument flow in the passage. Even within one single passage, there can be multiple arguments being made, multiple contradictions being presented. If you are practicing initially, I would just suggest you to solve, like note that down, make the structural argument structure, and then proceed to solve the questions. Because then when you are solving a certain question, you can easily contextualize that information with respect to what that came from. So these are the general principle of practicing for VRC for cat. The first one is that yes, reading newspapers, reading general newspapers, Statesman, Hindu, etc. helps. It like acclimatizes you with familiarizes you with reading English text in long English text. However, as I was saying that in CAT VRC you do not need to understand all of the words, all of the difficult vocabs that are being presented within the passage. I would just come to examples to for that purpose later. How you can like answer even vocabulary based questions of words you do not know the meaning to. You can do that in VRC without knowing the specific meaning of the word. So what I would suggest you to do is that if you are trying to pick up a reading habit for the RC to prepare for yourself for the RC section, try to read analytical reporting. There are sites like Vox or some good blogs on Medium you can check and try reading through them. Op-eds from good newspapers like BBC, Guardian, uh, probably Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, etc. are a good starting point. Many of them are subscription based, so I would just suggest you that you start with BBC, Guardian, and Vox, etc. Try to understand that the passages that you will be facing in CAT do not report something like do not report something very specific. What they do is that they pick up a general phenomena or general understanding or a situation that is present and analyze that situation, their cause effect, their history, etc., and present an argument or a opinion based on that. That is the general structure of passages presented in CAT. So it's very important to like read analytical reporting for that purpose. So if some of you are familiar with business school or some of you come from engineering backgrounds and have sat for placements in analytics companies, etc., you would be familiar with the idea of case studies, right? So in case studies what is given is that certain situation is given, some data is given regarding the situation that is presented, and we have to analyze the situation and appear at a proper conclusion regarding the situation. So you can think of RC sections in CAT like a case study but with much less data, much less numbers present within them. It's presenting you with a situation and it's testing you for how can you approach the analysis, how you can pick up information from an English passage that is given to you, that which would be very important going forward in business world. Now as I was saying, whenever you are solving like RC is initially for practice for getting a hang of it, always try to make the flowchart of arguments, like try to structure the arguments that would help you like internalize the pattern, how to do it internally in your mind when you are giving exams or mocks. Like when you are practicing initially, always try to, even if it's not required, always try to understand the arguments that is being made, how the argument has been structured in any RC, and that again would also help you in the summary sections of VA. Now, the third point I have stressed already multiple times. I don't think I need to go through that. I would just give you some examples later on when you are discussing particular problems. You would understand what I mean by how you can counteract the need for vocabulary with contextualizing the information that is presented to you. So now let's talk about the basic strategy of RC. Like I would not be going into particular details, particular fine details to improve your performance right now, because I don't think that if you have 1 year to prepare for it, you should take your time and understand the things, and then later on, like 1 or 2 months before the exam, you start optimizing the finer parts. So for now, the idea of general solving strategy is that identify the argument flow. If you cannot find a specific answer, it may generally be the case that the answer is not even in the specific paragraph or specific part you are looking into. It can be somewhere outside. Suppose say, even if you have a sentence from second paragraph of the passage, the actual answer to that might be hidden into the last paragraph. So try to do not get localized when you are trying to answer something in VR in RC. Always try to get the bigger picture. Also, there can be another case. Even if you can suppose say find answer to a situation, it might be the case that that is not the correct answer. If you would have taken a broader view, then you would see the answer quite differently. There can be cases like that. So my suggestion would be that whenever you are solving a paper, even in like if you properly execute the first step, that would have to be true, that when you are solving a RC, do not solve that in question wise basis. First get a general read through it, get the full picture, and then go to the particular questions. Then the accuracy would be much higher, which is a critical problem in RC sections, in VRC section at large in general. Now the third thing, that is, in CAT almost all sections are somewhat about time management and maintaining accuracy, choosing the right questions. So for that purpose, you have to choose some questions that you would be able to attempt, you would confidently attempt, and some questions that you would not be like comfortable with attempting. So in that regard, the identifying easier or the more difficult questions in LRDI and Quant has much easier strategies. However, in work, in particularly in RC, also you can do that. What you can do is that when you are reading through the passage, if the argument being made is too complex, too nuanced, too many conflicts, contradictions, parallels, then skip that passage. Then that probably not skip that passage, but however you would get to know that that particular passage is more difficult than others. So you do not judge the complexity of RC passage through its length or anything. You judge that difficulty through the by the complexity of the argument that is being made within the passage. As I've been stressing that in RC section, the argument is the key point, not the particular words, not the length, not the English that is being dealt with to you. You have to understand and analyze the arguments being presented to you. That is the key thing here. So now let's talk about RC questions. They can generally be divided into three parts. One summary, second being context, third being specific. So in summary, the first two ones, overall and paragraph summary, you might sound similar. So overall summary is that you have to summarize a general broad section or the entirety of passage, and this is somewhat like in paragraph summary. What happens is that the questions get more localized. So it's a bit difficult to identify these two separately, but you'd see with time, with practice, you can understand which is more localized, which is more general, and they have different categorization because they need different kind of contextualization to solve. Third one is the most difficult one under the summary section, that is argument supporting and undermining summary. So suppose it is given that this is the argument that the author is trying to make through the passage, which of these optional arguments 1 2 3 4 ABCD would support the argument of the author the most or undermine the argument of the author the most, then it gets relatively easier. However, in some cases, it just generally says that which of these arguments would support or undermine the author's argument here the most. So then you have to understand the argument that the author is trying to make, and then put the arguments given to you to assess which of them would support or undermine the argument the most. The second category, second broad category, context. Again, context under the two questions under context, sentence context and phrase context, are more or less similar. They differ by the fact that sentence context is generally much more specific, much more generalized, and phrase context is much more localized. So again, you would have to understand the difference between these through the practice that you would be going through. And generally, I understand this by the phrase or part of the question that is given, part of the passage that is given. Again, you would have to develop over practice over time. The last one being specific. First is inference logic. Particularly, inference logic means that a particular argument from the passage will be given to you. Then you would have to guess how the author has inferred them. So, very particular argument based inferences are to be assessed by you in this section. So, it's very specific compared to other to the summary and context part, which generally deals with a broader vision. The last one, obviously, even though I have told that the vocabs are not needed, there are some vocabulary based questions in the VRC in the RC section. However, as you can see that I have taken all the examples that I have given for these questions as to practice are from previous year CAT. So you can see from previous year CAT papers that even those vocabulary questions that are given to you, which specifically asks for meaning of certain words or asks you to like explain the application of certain words, even those questions can be contextualized and solved based on that. You do not need to understand or know beforehand exactly what those words mean. And I just go through particular as a more detailed explanation of these questions, solve one example for each of them, and then at the end I would like deal with a complete passage, let you assess the argument that is being made throughout. I would discuss the argument flowchart that I initially mentioned and solve the questions based on that. All of these passages are taken from previous year CAT, so you'd get a better, truer understanding of how the CAT paper is structured in the VRC section. So overall summary, again you have to identify the key ideas, arguments throughout the passage. You do not need to go into finer details for overall summary questions. It isn't like there might be cases where the overall summary of the or the overall argument of the passage is not discussed at a great length. Suppose something is discussed at a long, there is a long discussion based on certain topic, and however that is actually used for an example or a parallel to certain other thing, and when we are like at the end of the passage, the example is pointed to, and we essentially discuss or analyze a particular different situation. In that case, the last paragraph, the last argument that the last paragraph is making would be the summary or the main idea of the passage, even though the previous idea have been discussed at a great length. That is the example to the main idea, not the main idea itself. So the ideas do not depend on the length at which they are discussed in the passage. Keep that in mind when you are looking for them. And this has more recently changed into a more idea centric form, like what is the idea that the author is trying to deal with in such frame, or suppose say all of these can be concluded from the passage except, or what is your conclusion from the passage. They do not quote unquote ask you to like give the summary of this passage. That is, there is a separate part of question that deals with that, with much smaller passages. Here they generally try ask you to pick out ideas or conclusions or etc., which would generally mean summarizing the entire argument of the passage in itself. So let's take an example and deal with that. Just go through the passage and try to understand the entire logic argument that is given in here. So as I was saying that recently the questions have shifted to a more idea centric form. So this is a good example of that.